Hello and welcome back to part 2 in our series of videos on setting up your Asustor NAS right the very first time. Now in our previous video we looked at the physical setup, creating our storage pools and volumes, and in this part we're going to be looking at several things. We're going to be looking at user creation and user account modification, as well as looking at creating an area of shared storage for all of your users, allowing them certain degrees of customized control and access, as well as installing applications and services and getting that shared area of storage right there in front of your client machine. But I will highlight that, as you can see from the chapters at the bottom of the screen, we're going to be covering quite a lot. And also that none of the steps in today's video have to be followed in the order that I'm going to show you. They're just more convenient for me in order to show you in this order. You can approach every one of these in whatever order you like, because each one of them kind of leans upon the other. So go whichever system suits you and your setup needs and the time you've got to set up your Asustor NAS. So the first thing I'm going to talk about is user account creation and control. On the Asustor GUI, head over to Access Control, the button that should be at the top left of the options, but it may change depending on the layer of your apps and services on your device. Now, during the setup of this device, we created what I would refer to as a control account there. This isn't a full admin account, which has power user status, which is deactivated by default on ADM for security reasons. This is an account that has access and control of the system, but not on a back end level. And this is the account we're going to be utilizing to set up a number of things on this system. Now, we go ahead and we click add, or we can go ahead and add and create a single user. Now, why would we add multiple users on our system? Surely that's just going to create more attack vectors, right? Well, depending on how you're going to utilize your Asustor NAS, you may be utilizing it for distributing media across your home, maybe allowing distant relatives to access your photos. Look at those pictures of your latest nephew or grandchild. Why not? But on top of that, you may be using individual apps and services on your PC, Mac, iOS or Android system that you want to back up and access data on the NAS, but you don't want to give it too much control. And for that, you may wish to create individual apps and user accounts which can then give access to those devices and users, but not too much access. So for example, we're going to create the user Alan. Alan here, we can give them a description, that we can give them a password. So in my case, I'm going to give them a password here. And then from there, you can add an email address if you like. If you want to bind that to an existing email address that they're utilizing, you can stop it. You can prevent them from changing their password if you choose, as well as decide if you wish for this account to expire after a certain given period of time, if you want to give them limited and temporary access. From there, you can decide whether you want to curate the level of access this user has to the rest of your system storage and applications and services, or you can give them administrator rights, much like the primary account that we created during this setup. So for example, if you're going to give this user access to a light number of features and services, that's how you would go about doing so here. So for example, at the moment, we've got 2 shared folders on this system, and later on in the video, I'll show you how to create more. But say for example, we want to give them read-only access to the area of storage, which means they can see the contents of that data, but they can't write or amend it. Select RO as the option. Read and write gives them full access to read the data, upload fresh data, modify that data, even delete that. And deny access, or DA, means they have zero access to that data whatsoever. And you can tailor that to every area of shared storage across the Asustor system. From there, if you have installed individual applications and services, they will be listed here. This is what I mean about us showing different areas of this installation of apps, users and storage areas in the order of your own choosing. If you've already installed apps, they will appear here and you can assign the level of privilege or access this new user has to those. Next, we can see the layout of all that data and we can click Finish. Now, if you're a business user, you might want to be creating lots of users all at once. And for that, you can go ahead, if you choose to create multiple users. So for this one, we'll go for the username, just user. And we can say the suffix starting with the number 1 if we choose. And then we can scale through to how many users we want to add. So if we want to add 5 users starting from the number 1, we would assign it like so. give them a user if you wish, and again you can have every single user have that same password if you choose, and again you can have that password allowable to be amended by them if you choose, along with the expiration date as mentioned, and if you're going to use an email address too. All of that, nice and straightforward, means that you're able to create your new area of storage for access to a bundle of users at once. And again, you can define what their access rights are, more on groups in just a moment. Alongside that, go ahead and click finish. Now, let's talk about what exactly access groups are. Access groups, much like individual roles, rights, responsibilities, and access that you give to an individual user, you can actually create paddocks of users and therefore have those users overarchingly have their own levels of access and control. So for example, if you're a business and you've got sales teams, distribution teams, marketing teams, human resources, you can go ahead if you choose to create a folder, for this case sales, give it a description if you want, so call it sales team. From there, give it a GID, something that happens in the background of identifying factors for users and groups. Click next, decide which of those users you just created are going to be in that group. So let's say users 4 and 5 are in the sales team. From there, decide once again which shared areas of storage on the system this group has access to. So this group is going to have read and write access to everything in sales, and then click finish. And there you go, we've created a new group and we've moved users into it. And on the fly, if we wish, we can go into this group and edit that group on the fly and decide who is in it and who is not, as well as their levels of access. And the same goes via the local users. If you wish, you can move them in and out of different groups as you please, as well as assigning different levels of storage, access speed and storage quantity quotas here via this user interface as well. Now let's talk about those shared areas of storage, traditionally referred to in their most basic level as shared folders. Now if we go into the File Explorer, as mentioned earlier, you'll see that at least 2, potentially more, shared folders have been created here. Now these are the folders that perhaps you're going to be utilizing a Windows or Mac system or a local mobile application or other that you want to migrate the data back and forth between. So for example, we've got our public folder, but what about if we want to create a brand new shared folder? Select this icon here at the top, and then from there, that tab from Access Control will reopen, and there are a list of shared folders. What we can do is select Add, and we'll create a brand new shared folder. We'll call this one Media. We can give it an identifier if we wish, and if we've created multiple different areas of storage, see part 1 in this series, those different volumes, those containers, you can ensure that the shared area of storage is in a very specific container. So again, perhaps you wanted to create one blob of storage for your surveillance cameras, one for your backups, and one for your personal multimedia. This allows you to create those shared folders in those categories and share them in the most efficient way possible to you. Again, you can assign a network recycle bin if you choose, or disable it. You can also stop the drive from being visible on the network, but you probably won't need that if you're going for a basic level mapped drive, something we'll talk about in just a moment. Click next, and then from there we can choose who and what has access to this shared folder. So for example, we can say that everyone can access it, or only admins can use it and everyone else is read-write only, or we can let it be defined by some of those users and group rules that we created earlier on. So if we let it be defined by the user, and then from there we can choose whether other file transmission protocol can access it. We're going to go straight ahead with SMB, by the way, for anonymous third-party outside user access. Click next. From there, you now decide which users have access to this shared folder you're about to create. So in this case, I'm going to say that users 1, 2 and 3 have read and write access, but I'm going to say that users 5 and 4, the ones in that sales thing we created, have only got read-only access. From there, you can choose whether 1, you want to encrypt this shared folder, which means that it can't be withdrawn, and the encryption is locking it all in there within that system, and it will create an encryption key that needs to be stored to unlock that folder during reboots. Or you can enable a great feature known as write once, read many. And again, Asustor, when it comes to the larger range of NAS devices and NAS brands in the market, Although sometimes it can be considered they're not as highly featured as, say, Synology or QNAP, it has to be said that such as their support of BTRFS, the support of media mode, something we'll talk about in a future video, and indeed their support of write once, read many, it really does put them ahead in some regards to some of the other brands in the market. Now, what is write once, read many? Nice and simple, write once, read many ensures that when the data is being written to this shared folder you're creating, be it sales documents, insurance documents, or perhaps even photos from your wedding or your firstborn, you may wish to ensure that data can never be accidentally deleted, never be hit by ransomware. It can be encrypted up or modified and then you're extorted for money. In that way, write once, read many is phenomenally impressive. You have a governance mode and a compliance mode, one of which will allow you to, for an admin to be able to modify the content of that folder, and then you have the compliance mode where no one can make any changes whatsoever to that data. Now, you can do an auto log where the data will be available to be edited for a certain period of time, but after that time it stops, and then from that point no one can delete it, no one can modify it unless you go for a governance mode where the admin account can. Alternatively, you can do a retention period, which means that that data is completely unchangeable for this amount of time, and then afterwards it's free roaming, it's free grabs. It's much like if a company needs to retain certain data legally for a given period of time. This is a great way to ensure that that data on the system is unchangeable and maintained in its original state, free of any modifications, official or otherwise. And the same goes where if you want to change the lock status to append only, where changes can be made to the data, or immutable, where no single change can happen to the original data there. Moving forward, we just need to confirm this information, click finish, and now we've got our brand new shared folder there, and any data we put inside there is now subject to that write once, read many, and the rulings we decided with regard to immutable backups or changes. Now, we've created our area of shared storage, and if we wish, we could go into the local users that we created earlier on and start assigning them or changing the modification and access. But what about if you want to access that folder on your Windows machine? What if you want to access it in a native way? Now, in the next part in this series of videos, I will be talking about more tailored and more streamlined and ultimately more efficient ways to synchronize your local device, your PC, Mac or mobile systems, with the NAS in a native, invisible way. But a lot of users that want the most entry-level, easy way to access the NAS in a breadcrumb file folder way will use a system known as mapped network drives. Now, for that, you would have needed to create a shared folder, something we've done, and then from there, head into that Asustor Control Center application we talked about in our previous video. From there, highlight the NAS in question, and then from there, highlight Connect, and then select Map Network Drive. Enter user credentials, and again, depending on the level of access you want to have to assign connectivity on the NAS to your local system, enter the correct credentials. Because what we're doing right now is creating, if we go onto our local PC here, you can see here there's my local machine, but there's two drives under here. These are known as mapped network drives. These are the drives that allow me to see the contents of a NAS on my local machine using my local file explorer, working for Mac, Windows or Ubuntu Linux. Now, again, as mentioned, we will be talking later on about Easy Sync Manager soon, but for now, it's worth talking about this rather easy way to allow your NAS to be visible as a nice, easy bucket container here on your file explorer. So once you've added the credentials via the Asustor Control Center app, click Next. It then lists all of the drives that we've created. And as you can see, there is our media folder we created earlier. Assign the drive a letter. Let's give it the letter N. And then from there, you can choose to either remember the credentials permanently in your system or have to keep adding every time you reboot your system the login credentials for that mapped drive. And from there, it will open up there in Windows, and there is our mapped network drive. This is that folder that is on the Asustor NAS there. Now again, make sure to factor in your write once, read many and access privileges to ensure that the user account you create to log in and connect via a mapped network drive has sufficient read and write privileges for your needs. Also bear in mind again, much like I mentioned at the beginning of the video, when creating multiple user accounts, that can be used for different services, that this system of creating individual user accounts will ensure that this user, for example, using a Windows machine, will be able to map this network drive, but you won't give them too much power that the credentials they have will allow them to either intentionally or accidentally delete core and important information on the system, with or without write once, read many. Now, if you want to add data to your Asustor NAS, you can head back into the File Explorer, and then from there, select the folder that you want to interact with, if you wish, and then from there, save the public folder. You can select the Upload option here. And what that'll do is allow you to select some individual files and folders on your system, click Open, and then it will upload them onto the NAS. Alternatively, you can head in to an area of storage on your system, find an available folder, such as I'll do there. Let's select any random folder, select some images, and you can highlight some files and just drag and drop them if you wish into the web browser. And again, choosing whether you want to overwrite the files with the same name or have them skip it so you don't waste time on those. And as you can see, it will now start uploading this data onto the NAS and allow it to be accessible. Now, if we go back into our shared map network drive, on our Windows system, if I select network, if I wish, I can scan the local area network, find our NAS, and then from there we can add that NAS if we choose manually, and we can add all those other folders to our map network drive selection, ultimately allowing us to not only access and interact with the NAS here, but also allow us to access and interact with the NAS on our desktop computer. It's also worth touching on that the way you interact with the NAS will differ sometimes from operating system to operating system in terms of the protocol you use, or if you're going to be utilizing specialized equipment or more specialized communication between your client device and the NAS. For that, go into the Services tab, and from there, there's a list of different file services that you can use to communicate with your client system and the Asustor NAS, and each one has its own pros and cons. Moreover, if you want to start creating communication from NAS to NAS, that's where systems such as rsync will come into play, but we'll go into more detail on that one on the next video regarding synchronization and backup routines. Let's close today's video on the subject of apps. Now, when it comes to applications and you want to install new tools onto your Asustor NAS, head into the App Central. Much like iOS and Android with Android Play, it's really easy to start downloading apps and services onto your system. And as you can see, at the first time of booting the App Center on your Asustor NAS, you can actually choose to bulk install lots of applications for backups, for business and more. And if you select those, it will install multiple applications for different needs for your own requirements. Or you can skip those and manually start installing apps. So for example, for photography, go ahead and click install there. It will then install the application there in the background and it will start to install it. And once again, after it is installed, what you can do via the application center is head back into the control center, select individual users, and then as new apps and services are added, let's select user 1 and then edit their privileges. It will allow us to change not only those shared folders once again, but again in the App Center, as new apps are installed, we can choose who can access that via their user groups or via their individual user protocol. And finally, don't forget, with any active user on your system, it's always highly recommended that you take advantage of two-step verification. Now, two-step verification accessible via the Personnel tab or via the Access Control, where you can manually as an admin assign two-step verification, will ensure that not only a username and password on its own will be the barrier between a user and full access to the system, regardless of the level of privilege and access to services you give them. Two-step authentication with support of other 2FA or OTP services will allow you to add another layer of security for your system and ensure that only authorized users have access. And don't forget, you can even take things a step further by going into the settings menu and via the management tab, not only disabling insecure access, such as I'm using a local area network and have not installed an encrypted certificate here. Again, we've got a whole video on security settings on this system coming soon. But on top of that, you can ensure that there's an auto logout, and you can go ahead and change some of the default ports. Again, as mentioned on this system that you should really have set at the beginning, you can change those here on these settings. things. Ultimately, the Asustor platform has come forward leaps and bounds in recent years, and some of the apps and services included therein have really challenged some of their competitors out there. Now, in the third part in this series, we are going to be looking at backup and synchronization. We're going to be looking at tools like the Easy Sync Manager for more tailored, user-friendly, and ultimately more efficient means to synchronize your local storage with the NAS, but we're also going to be using some of the backup and restore options to create a NAS-to-NAS backup, a NAS-to-USB backup, and even a NAS-to-cloud backup, all of which can be automated on a schedule and ultimately ensure that your 3-2-1 backup strategy, where you've got data in more than one location and you've got more than one copy of it, are all running smoothly in the background. Add to that the support of write once, read many, and snapshots within BTRFS, and you've got some real solid options to ensure that your data is safe. But if you're still on the fence and you need support and you don't quite know what NAS you need, or that you've already got your NAS and not knowing how to make the most of it, once again, head over to NAS Compares and take advantage of either the free advice section or the NAS Builder to help you on day one. The NAS Builder will allow you to choose the app services and profile that you need and spit out the right NAS for your needs. But on top of that, the free advice section will give you a free response to your inquiry within 3 to 5 days. We answer every single one. If you need more expedited support and want to support us anyway, you can use our expedited support over on Ko-Fi. And again, on Ko-Fi, there is not only support of that, but there's also support of 1 hour Zoom consultations with myself or Eddie to help you get the most storage for your needs. Or head over to our Ask.NAS Compares community forum, or join our membership tier where we go through monthly Zooms with our users, as well as expedited support, as many as you need during the month, and more. But this has been the next stage in our Asustor setup guide for 2024. I look forward to seeing you on the next video.